Okay, so might as well just kick off then. Thank you everyone for coming to navigating allyship and research and fieldwork. Thank you for taking time out of your days to come to what I think is a pretty important discussion for us to be having in academia right now. My name is Bennett Collins. I am Deputy Director at the Third Generation Project, which is a think tank here in the School of International Relations at the University of St. Andrews that focuses on developing climate justice education. So yeah, just to say that this event is actually organized by a mix of postgraduate and undergraduate students. So the other co-hosting organizations are the BAME Students Network here at St. Andrews, the St. Andrews Student Anthropology Society, and the Sustainable Development Society. And we just wanted to kick off by talking about why our different groups actually wanted to have this discussion about why we need to begin making a turn in academic research to become more transparent, more accountable, and more collaborative in what we do. For the Third Generation Project, we kind of were founded on the premise that we know that research isn't an inherently good word. And in fact, many of the communities that we've worked with over the past decade are often experiencing research fatigue as well as distrust with academic researchers. And so in response, we really prioritize a methodology that keeps us accountable, seeks to develop long-term relationships, and always make sure that anything that is collaborative always benefits the communities more than academic researchers. I think in my experience, whenever I go out, I mean, at the beginning of my research career, for me, some of the first communities that I went to, I mean, the question is always, well, so what? So what's in it for me? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the premise of Western academic research is to kind of benefit the researcher more than it is to benefit the researched. And I think that's encouraged across the board, uncritically and unreflexively. So for us, that's for the Third Generation Project, that's really important that we begin to discuss. So just going down the line of the co-organizers. So Mathilde, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure, thank you. And thank you, Bennett, for the introduction. So hello, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much to our speakers for the time they're taking. So my name is Mathilde, and as Bennett introduced, I'm the president of the Sustainable Development Society in St. Andrews. So as a society, we aim to raise awareness about sustainable development and to spark open discussions on how to achieve it, and to create a feeling of community between students and staff members interested in sustainable development. So we're truly excited to be co-hosting this discussion today, and we believe it is part of a critical movement aiming to address power inequalities to truly achieve sustainable development. So climate change impacts everyone, and in particular people who are part of the most oppressed communities. And as a result, to truly achieve sustainable development for everyone, we believe it is essential to create discussion spaces where everyone can be heard and be listened to, and to develop fair, honest, and meaningful partnerships. So as students and academics, we have the privilege to be here, and we must use it well. We need to work through these power imbalances and reflect critically on our own practices and act to support voices that remain too little heard in our universities. So yeah, we really hope that this event will help all of us here today to better understand how this can be achieved.
Great, thanks, Mathilde. Anania from the BAME Students Network, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, I'm Ananya, and I'm the co-president of the BAME Students Network, which is the newest subcommittee of the Student Association. We were founded and made official over the summer, and just a brief introduction to us. We are a network of students that look towards improving the BAME or the Black, Asian, minority ethnic student experience at the university. And because we're a subcommittee, that means every student who self-identifies as BAME can be a part of us without having to pay anything, or any student can come to any of our events and take part in our discussions. And while our formalization and formation was in a very specific context over the summer, we believe that in general, our work is just starting. This semester has just been laying the groundwork for establishing a lot of different networks and a lot of different areas we need to work on. When it comes to this specific event, thank you very much to our speakers and all the other collaborators for organizing this and for reaching out to us and so that we can be a part of it. In terms of research, the term itself in the past, and also not a very far away past, in a very recent living memory, has often been linked to, let's say, a fetishization or even an exoticization of BAME individuals. And for a long time, the concept of ethics weren't a priority when it came to research and involved a lot of power relations. While there is more awareness about this now, and there's lots of different issues and lots of different considerations we keep in mind, the fact is that it definitely needs to be spoken about more, and it definitely needs to be practiced more. So we believe that we as a network, while we do focus on the student experience, we want to work towards different areas and a vast variety of areas, and academia is definitely one of them. So that's why we want to be a part of this, because we want to be a part of facilitating such discussions. So thank you again for organizing this, and thank you to all our speakers. We're really looking forward to the event.
Thank you. And finally, Benjamin from the Anthropology Society.
Thank you, Bennett, Matilda, and Ananya for their introductions. My name is Benjamin, and I'm speaking on behalf of the University of St. Andrews Anthropology Society. We are a student society dedicated to fostering a community of people who are studying or interested in anthropology. We are really excited to collaborate on this webinar because anthropology as a discipline has contributed extensively to a Western academic canon where power imbalances in knowledge creation and relationships have resulted in colonialism and exploitation. As a field that still puts a lot of emphasis on ethnographic fieldwork as methodology, it is concerning that topics of ethics in Western research and fieldwork practices are not addressed more extensively. We would like to thank the speakers and our fellow co-hosts for making this webinar possible, and we are looking to engage in the discussion and the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. So without further ado, our speakers, I guess just to take this opportunity to say, I'm really looking forward to this discussion ahead. I feel like all the speakers are going to be able to comment about how academia can be making more of a reflexive and more of a critical turn when it comes to research, and how we conduct ourselves when we're practicing field work. Yeah, so just I guess going down the line and letting the speakers introduce themselves. We'll begin with Latif Ismail from Transparency Solutions. You're muted, Latif.
Apologies. Bennett, thank you so much for inviting me to this session. And can I say hello to my colleagues on this panel, especially to the organizers, apart from yourself, to Benjamin and Matilda. We have two presidents, so I think I should be in my best behavior. And so it's great to be here. I work with a company called Transparency Solutions. We're based in north of Somalia, or what's now called Somaliland. We do primarily research, and we work closely with the government here in Somalia, Somaliland, but also with a number of donors, especially the British government, what used to be DFID, Foreign Affairs, and indeed other departments, as well as the Danish Embassy, the US, a number of donors who have an interest in the country. So I come to this platform today as a practitioner. I have an honorary associate position with the University of Bristol, but I don't describe myself as an academic. I'm a practitioner, and I have done so for a long time, both in in East Africa and a little bit in West Africa, but also in Asia. So I hope I can say something about my experience. Just to add what Bennett was saying about the problem with how research is conducted, not only that there is research fatigue and consultation fatigue in this part of the world, but what we also see is, and I know we will come to this later on, consultants not only flying in or parachuting in, as you put it in your introductory paper, but also sometimes using the same research and then needs analysis that they've done in Burma, doing it in Somalia, and all they have to do is to change the name Burma to Somalia, and sometimes they forget that. So you're reading something and say, so in Burma, even though they're talking about Somalia. So there is a huge problem with how research is conducted and how donor-led research, which is very much led by Western governments, is conducted. There are some pockets of good examples, but on the whole, it's problematic and it needs to be addressed. I'll stop there and hopefully we can get to the discussions later.
Thank you, Latif. Providence, could you please go next?
Yes, thanks again, Bennett, for organizing this event. So I'm Providence Akayesu. I'm a Rwandan I'm from Rwanda in East Africa, and I'm also sitting in Rwanda in Kigali, in the capital city. I'm a biologist, conservationist. I'm a National Geographic explorer. And I think in the last 2 years, I had some discussion with Bennett about my research funded by National Geographic on the tourism impacts on community development around one of the national parks here in Rwanda. And since then, he was interested in my research. He was following me, and then he has invited me in this webinar, which I think is basically a very important discussion to understand that the problem is there is a wrongdoing in the research, the sharing the data, but also the engagement of the communities. And I look forward to providing my own experience from Rwanda, but also learning from my my colleagues, panelists here, but also through the questions from the students and the other academicians. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Providence. Ariadne?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me. So I'll start a little bit with telling you about myself and focus a bit on who I am and my arc towards where I am at the moment. So I'm from Guyana, which is this tiny country in the north of South America. And it's geographically South American, but culturally and politically and historically Caribbean. And my education has been my, let's say, undergrad and graduate studies all took place in, I guess you could say, Western or semi-Western contexts. So not true. My undergrad was in Guyana. My master's took place in London. PhD in Budapest, which is Central European, not quite Western, but it's an American university there. And I've since lived and worked in Berlin and now live and work in Scotland at the University of St. Andrews. My research is on forest conservation in Guyana and Suriname. And within my research, I pay particular attention to the ways in which different communities use the forest. And I study market-based mechanisms for conserving forests in order to address climate change. So for me, context-specific, historically informed research is really important. And I come from the perspective, you can say, of somewhat local, as in being from Guyana and partly studying Guyana, somewhat not so local in studying Suriname and not being from Suriname, and operating in a pretty Western context, because the research that I'm working with, like the research I've been conducting over the past decade, took place in these universities in Europe that I just mentioned. So it's a pretty layered set of experiences. What else should I say? I think that's it. So that's who I am. And I look forward to talking to you and fielding questions.
Thanks, Ariadne. And finally, Rosanna McVie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to take part in this. I'm not a researcher I'm a Scottish gypsy traveller. I was brought up in a racial experiment, Tinker experiment in Bobbin Mill. It was one of a network that was covertly put on foot in the 40s throughout, started in the 40s throughout Scotland. I had to go to school because a lot of my community don't go to school, but we were forced to go to school because if you didn't, you were taken and put into care. I graduated from Aberdeen University with honours Celtic Studies, English, then teacher training, Scottish Gaelic teacher, English teacher, and then I did a postgraduate in television production through the medium of Gaelic. I've also done human rights training in Strasbourg under the auspices of Minority Rights Group International. I helped to set up the first real rights group for our community in Scotland in the 90s and worked for it in 98, 99. And since then, I never got a single day's work with a public body. So I realised they didn't want me encouraging people to set up tenants groups and different things. So I started actively finding a way to do it with no money. So members of the community would come and pick me up to take me to advocate extensively across Scotland for them. And I've been involved in social work panels, children's panels, all sorts of things, housing, planning, all sorts, advocating for my community. Currently, I'm on the Adequate Living Standards Working Party under the Scottish Human Rights Commission, and I'm also the secretary for a little project that we've set up ourselves called Rajpot. Now, that actually works, we're making links with Indigenous communities across the world, and what we're trying to do is use that as a social education, social engagement project using multi-arts format. And using arts to express and highlight the breaches of human rights that come across, we come across in our community every day and encounter. Basically, I have been involved in research before. The council that I was offered my services to didn't want me even as a volunteer, but the researcher co-opted me as our co-researcher. And that was quite a good learning curve for how research, I think, should be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosanna. So we're going to ask kind of a roundtable question and just see where the discussion goes. And that should take us around 40 minutes. I'm conscious of time here because I like ending when we promise to end and respecting people's time. Before we get into the Q&A, and if you do have questions during this discussion, I'd encourage you to pop them in the chat box. I'm trying to multitask here between trying to keep everyone muted, unmuted, and looking at the chat box and admitting people and all of that. So if you can just pop it in the chat box, that would be much appreciated, and we can get to it in the Q&A. I think the premise of this event is now set. We see unequal relationships between academia and those that academia chooses to research or chooses to research with. Collaboration doesn't inherently mean equal partnerships as well. But I just want to actually point to Linda Turi-Wise-Smith's seminal publication, Decolonizing Methodologies, where she talks about research. She's also a Maori academic, and from her experience that she writes in the book, that research has become an inherently dirty word to many in the world. And I guess starting off as the overarching question, where does academia go wrong in your experience, both as practitioners working, having to work with academia sometimes, and also the academics within academia, where do you feel like the system goes wrong, possibly within? And also, I think for many students, how can we begin to make a turn, especially since many of us are at the start of our careers, and we can begin, trying to mold the system a bit more, if I can be a bit idealistic. But anyway, do any of you have beginning comments or would like to kick off?
Well, Bennett, I can only talk from a community perspective, you know, a grassroots level, and having been the recipient of research too. But it seems that the academics come in, that they're sort of piloted in, as you say, and they take something out of the community, take it away. They don't necessarily even come back and tell them, you know, what's the results of this, you know, the reports, the resolution, they send bits of paper. And it's a community which has a dearth of educational acumen for a various number of reasons, nowhere to stop, not getting their children to school, getting them to school and they're bullied and what have you. But I feel they come in as we're the experts. And yes, they may be academic experts in their field, not disputing that. But they're not, no one can be an expert on that community, but the person who lives in it, better than the person who lives in it, the lived experience and the membership of the community. And I mean, I'm a Gaelic teacher, but I would never say I know everything about the Gaels. I would defer to the Gael. If they say this is the way we do things, I would say, fair enough, that's the way you do it. One example I would say is quite often the research is driven by policy issues, and these are set by power structures. And therefore, the stuff that needs to be learned isn't being learned necessarily because it's been driven in a certain way by the people who are funding it. And that's not necessarily the academics' fault, but if they, you know, they tender for a piece of research or something like that, and they're hired to do it, if it's set by government, then they have an agenda. And I think this getting away from agenda-driven stuff and realising that the information that's within communities, if you're taking something out, you need to give something back as well, or be seen to be given something back. And I think they should start at the very beginning by researching the community that they're thinking about doing the research within. That way they'll have some background knowledge, they'll build up links, they'll build up trust, and not just fly in there and go, oh, we're doing this piece of research, could you take me into a site, or whatever I've been asked to do in the past, which I don't really do now, unless I really know the people have good intentions and that they're working with the community to set the parameters for the research in the first instance. Don't know what the rest think, but that's grassroots level.
May I come? Oh, sorry. No, you go ahead, Adrian.
I just wanted to piggyback on the last comment that Rosanna made. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. About the way about not engaging with communities, not engaging with researchers as much unless you know the people. And I felt like that's I just really wanted to respond to that, because I think part of the beginning phase of research is really important for setting the tone for the way in which the researcher will carry out his or her research. And it is indeed really important to form relationships with people before you just turn up and ask them to do things. So for me, like when I was conducting research in the field, I didn't have an automatic connection, even though I was from the countries or the region being studied, didn't have an automatic connection to communities. But my approach was to speak to people I knew who knew other people who could put me in touch, and to affiliate myself with institutions who worked in the field, while making clear to the communities with whom I worked and conducted research that I was not a part of these institutions, but that I was kind of working with them in particular ways to get access to communities. So it's always useful to form relationships before you make requests of communities, and to be very clear about where you are standing in relation to different institutions or entities with whom you might be liaising or working. But yeah, since there's like a ton more I could say, but I will pass the mic to Latif.
Thank you, Ariane. And I can relate to what you and Roseanne have said. But what I would add is that one thing we notice is societies, especially Somalis, I would say that some of the most misunderstood people in the world. And you have academic practitioners or donors who already have their pre-perceptions and preconceived ideas about the society. So it's already an uphill struggle to change that. So that is a problem. Secondly, and that is, it's very much influenced by the media, it's influenced by colonial legacy. I was talking to an Irish guy the other day here in my office, who both of us were talking about Churchill. I used to call Somalis the Irish Africans because he thought we were as wild. The Irish were wild, Somalis are even wilder. And I think that is, in his mind, it was a compliment, but it wasn't. So the way I know Churchill, there was a dark side to Churchill, I guess. The way that we normally notice, be it an academic or an embassy or a donor entity, there is an English saying that he who has the gold makes the rules. So these entities will come to you with their ideas and projects, and they have deliverables, they have timelines. People's careers are depending on this, and they tell you what to do. So you have to deliver it. And you have to follow those deliverables. Otherwise, they don't get paid, they don't get promoted, you don't get paid. So that's a real issue. And you don't have no say how that project is designed. The other thing is also, as my other colleagues were saying, it's not only taken into account and consulting with what the people on the ground want and desire and what would make difference, it's also very much usually has a very tight timeline because these people are under time strict. And in the East, normally, when I say the East, I'm including anything that's not the West. Normally, the time you give to someone is itself a sign of respect. But when you have someone saying to you, no, hang on, I only got half an hour to talk to you, you sit there and tell me, that's disrespectful. And also, it's also the fact that you have not built that relationship. So time is, while it's obviously, I am for people being efficient and making sure that things are done properly, the time you take itself to somebody is really important. I remember working as a young researcher in Pakistan, and I had to go and visit farms, people who have been given some aid money to cultivate their land. And I would travel almost a day in rough roads. And when I get there, all the farm owner, all he wants to talk about was just to sit down and drink lots of sweet tea and talk about life. And who am I to say, look, the donor is waiting for me? They would tell me to F off, excuse my bad language. So you literally have to sit there, you get them, let them get comfortable with you. And then if that means the following day, come back the following day. But that may not work for academic research or a donor. Certainly, it's hugely problematic for donors who give you a limited time to get through a lot. So I'll stop there, but I do think there are serious problems that how currently is what's perceived to be successful research in the West. It's not necessarily successful research or produce a successful result in the East.
Yes, I agree. I agree with the previous speakers, and I will also compliment them with two examples as basically for the context of my country in Rwanda. So as a local researcher and especially conducting socioeconomic studies involving, for instance, the interviews and the questionnaires with the communities or some of the stakeholders, I emphasize on the issue of creating relationships and partnerships with the project stakeholders, because at one hand, I need to ask the questions at the communities or at the district or the government or the civil society. At the second hand, I also need to get existing data from different institutions involved in my project. So in that way, if if I didn't contact the people beforehand, then they will not share the data. And also the communities might hesitate to answer some of my questions because they do not know me, because they would be introduced from the local government. Basically at the village level, they would introduce the researcher to the communities in the village. But the authorization comes from the district or the ministry, the high level. At the other hand, as an international researcher coming into Rwanda, for instance, a US researcher coming to Rwanda, and you want to conduct some maybe socioeconomic research again. So you are looking for some of the existing data, and then, for instance, you might contact the international NGOs operating in the country to give you the data. Because, for instance, I might say that the government entities maybe are not experienced in collecting enough and accurate data, then you address yourself to the international organization in the country. And then at the end of the day, the government is not aware, but your results and your conclusion from your project come back to the whole country, including government and civil society NGOs. So this goes wrong like that, and then I agree that we need to change a bit. We already have some solutions, but again, we need to understand that this still happens and it has to be sorted together. Thank you.
Thank you for all of your responses. I'm already finding the discussion so valuable. Definitely going to keep this recording. Following on from that, I think something that is especially raised from Ariadne is the question of the positionality of the researcher. And this need to be reflexive ultimately in our methodologies about where we choose to go, because I think across the board, many in academia, which is characterized by overly white, overly male, and overly Western, encourages kind of what I would call kind of a cowboy researcher mentality of you can go anywhere you want, just wherever the research is. And I guess can you speak to what happens, I guess, when we're not reflexive about our positionalities, and it's not as simple as being from the community, as you said, Ariadne. You can be from a community and still encounter problems with regards to positionality. But I guess what happens then when we're not reflexive, I think would be something perhaps to touch on.
Should I start?
Sure.
What happens when we're not reflexive? I think, so you've already pointed, Bennett, to the fact that research can be inherently an unequal relationship, where one person is removed from a situation and known to be studying the people with whom they're engaging. And I think if we start with an awareness of this inequality of the researchy, let's call it, relationship, and then add on top of it all the numerous societal inequalities that come along with just being in the world and traversing it, you get a pretty fraught situation. So yes, some people are privileged enough to feel as if they have the, I don't know, right, so to speak, and as somebody in the comments pointed out, in the chat pointed out, feeling as if they're actually doing a favor to people in the field when they research them. But what that leads to, in order to actually try to answer your question, to respond to it, is conclusions that are descriptive of more than what was actually studied. So conclusions that are overreaching and perhaps too broad. So again, like using my own experience. So even though I am from the country one of the countries that I study, I'm fully aware of the fact that this country is ethnically divided, and that the conclusions I draw are based on the fact that I, as I interact with people on the ground, position me in certain ways based on what I look like, and they assume political affiliations based on the ethnicity that they feel I fit in this particular context. So I'm always, it's almost as if being local has its advantages and disadvantages. Advantages in being able to access some communities and policymakers or having family members who know people and so on. But then also disadvantages in that there's a certain familiarity with which you can be categorized. And hence, it's my responsibility as I engage with people to, one, be aware of some of the preconceptions and ways in which they keep me in their worldview in the particular context. And in being reflexive in this dynamic, in this set of circumstances, to realize that when I draw conclusions from my research, it does not necessarily describe everything in the country. It's limited. I guess what I'm saying is that it's always important to remember that your positionality based not just what you come with and the frameworks through which you view the world as a researcher, but also the way that people receive you, the way that these dynamics influence what you find. It matters. I'll stop there again.
If I can just add to that, I think Ariane was describing you're an academic, I'm not. I'm a practitioner, but it's good to reflect both. And what I would say, absolutely agree with what you've said. One of the challenges of working in the developing world is, and my experience not only here in Somalia but a little bit in Asia and parts of Africa, is the fact that researchers, whether they are academics or donors, normally rely on who's on the ground from them. So, for example, British Embassy have got offices here, literally about 500 yards from my office here. And I know the information that they have, the diplomat, whether they are diplomats or key officials representing certain governments, the information they have is limited to the bubble that they live in. So they travel, in most cases, armored vehicles. They dine, yes, they wine and dine, or sometimes drink camel milk with officials if there's no wine. And the reality that they have to the real people is somewhat limited. So when someone is coming from the UK or Netherlands or the US, the exposure that they have and what's written is based on their understanding of the individuals who are Somalia experts, Guyana experts, or Gypsy experts, so on and so forth. And really, that is a huge problem. So I can give you an example. For example, tomorrow, there is a conference organized by the British government to encourage British businesses. UK is leaving the Brexit. We won't talk about that. I'll take that. We need another session on that, I guess. We won't talk about Brexit, but UK is looking for other markets. So Somalia, having lots of resources, could be a lucrative place for UK businesses. So that conference is happening tomorrow. So this is not hypothetical. It's something that's happening tomorrow. So they want to invite serious UK companies to talk to serious Somali-owned companies and governments. It's going to be on Zoom and because it's for a similar reason why we're doing this. But there is a problem there, and I said this to the high-ranking official here, whom I know very well, and I actually have a little time for. I said, Stuart, have you looked at the Foreign Office website about Somalia? And he said yes. Or I said, what does it say? And it says that travel to Somalia is not advised, or it's actually red. It's blood. So you can only go to Hargeisa, where I'm sitting, and Berbera on the coast, but you can't go anywhere else. This country is twice the size of the United Kingdom. So the UK government is only saying you can visit 2 small cities. Yet, with UK government is telling UK businesses to invest. So the dilemma is, and a lot of those businesses contact us for feasibility studies, they won't invest here because their government is telling them, don't go, you'll be killed. So for us, it's that mixed messages. It's the fact that the individuals who are experts are really not experts, and I think that adds to the pressure, because if I don't know how many hoops you jumped through when you came here, Bennett, in terms of your insurance, in terms of risk analysis, in terms of you know, whether even your family were told maybe you won't come back, you'll be hijacked by pirates like me with one eye. So this is what we're fighting against every day. It's that entrenched system where governments, NGOs, businesses are all regurgitating the same rubbish. That is, it's what's been written, and it hasn't changed in the last 50 years. Back to you.
Yeah.
Rosanna or Providence, do you have anything? Yeah.
I was going to say, this relationship where the researcher is superior and it's unequal. I think it was Ariadna that said that. One way around it is a co-production with the community, and you provide the academic framework around about what the community wants to bring out. You can present it in an academic way, but you work hand in hand with the community. One lady that I'm thinking about who did a similar thing with gypsies and travellers in England was Professor Judith Oakley. And she's set on record as saying, you know, most research is commissioned by power structures, as I've said, which we know, and they dictate, you know, what the format will be. But I think if you do a co-production and you genuinely appreciate whether it's an oral culture, they've got information you won't get in books. And if you want to extract that information successfully, I think you must co-produce. And that's how I've worked, because I don't have resources. But anything I've got out there, like, you know, making a difference, unison, co-production, you know, IRIS, the Institute for Research and Social Policy in Scotland, co-productions. These things have gone out because they've got the resources, but I can tap into the information in the community that we want to get out there. So it's been more of an equal footing, and I think that's one way to look at it, rather than just say, but I appreciate what Latif was saying, that if you've got a tender from government or someone, they want X information, and I've seen this happen in my community. Someone went out to do research and they set half an hour for each survey. Of course, that just doesn't work, because the people sit and tell stories and they illustrate every point with a story. So 5 hours later and about 50 cups of tea later, and he still hasn't got one survey filled in. And I said, that's just not the way to do it. You'll get nothing out of them. And it totally frustrates all the conferences and meetings and government meetings I've been, it totally frustrates all the bureaucrats, because when they ask them a question about their experience of something, they get about 50 stories. But this is a cultural, because it's an oral culture, and this is how they bring forth information through a story. So I think that, you know, that's why I go back to my original point. Research the community you want to work with, because the community that's going to host you is the expert on their community. Don't know if it helps or not, but that's it.
Yeah. These are very great points. So I agree, and for me, I keep in mind that the communities, I actually need them more than they need me. I need them to agree with my interventions, and I need them to answer my questions than they need me. So I will also give one more tangible example from Rwanda on not academia, but a conservation project that I have also implemented in the last 2 years. So we had to provide the trees, the agroforestry and the fruit trees to the communities. But then if you do not ask them what they want to grow on their own land, then you just provide the saplings without asking them. Then you also plant rather than asking them to choose and plant themselves, they will end up uprooting. They will end up uprooting the trees you have planted. Yeah, this has happened already, and is a bad result of not engaging them and communicating with them on what you want to achieve and how they would benefit from it. Yeah, that's it from my end for now. Thank you.
I was just going to say, Providence, I know that there are science students on this call, and I think a lot, I mean, from my perspective, I'm biased towards the social sciences and what kind of gets reproduced, you know, through ethnographies and all of that. I guess specifically for you, and if others want to touch on this as well, I mean, do you see where the natural sciences perhaps overlook the social component of research and needing to address that in research methodology prep?
I didn't quite hear that, Bennett.
So my question is just whether researchers and students in the natural sciences, the physical sciences, they overlook the social aspect of research. Of they simply just need to go, you know, get the humans out of the way to kind of get to what they need to get to for research.
Yeah.
Yeah, without making the consideration for social sciences or the social aspect. Sorry.
Well,
Yes.
that's how it's been today.
Okay, Rosanna, go. No problem.
No, you go, Providence. On you go.
Okay, great. So, Bennett, that's a very important question. I will give a bit of contribution to that. Yes, I'm a natural scientist actually, and like one of the research I've done for my master's was the mapping. I mean, the mapping of the species consumed by the gorillas. This is an example of about diversity research, and then in this way. I did not necessarily consider the socioeconomic aspects of the research because I wasn't really considering the communities. I was only considering the forests and the park rangers, the park managers, and yeah. So I think there is also something, yeah. Most of the times we do not consider the socio-economic aspects when we are conducting the biodiversity or conservation research. I think the others can also add on that.
Rosanna, did you have anything to say on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's self-explanatory, isn't it? Quite often to date. And I think Latif spoke about it over the last 50 years. I can't remember back that far, but of the years that I've been helping people or students, I've had students come to me and things like that. They don't know, you know, they're just coming with a questionnaire. And really, they should come and say, do you want to have a cup of tea? Sit down, we'll break bread or whatever, and find out, you know, what's going on in the community, what's important to them, maybe what taboos were. I remember one person researching, he went to a caravan on the roadside, and he went in and he didn't know that not to ask the lady how many months pregnant she was, and then he got the door slammed in his face and no one would talk to him then because that was a taboo for a male to say that to a female. So what I'm saying is there is a very strong social aspect, particularly when you're dealing with a marginalised community, and it's very important to tap into that and find out if you're really committed to helping, doing something that will help them rather than a fancy piece of research. It sounds good. Find out what's going on in their lives. And that is the social aspect. And that I think that's the human aspect as well. Human beings you're talking to. There's things going on in their lives. There's things that, you know, they adhere to rules in their community, and you don't just go in and trample all over them. But your research is going nowhere then.
Going back to this question of natural science and getting community members or people just out of the way. I'm not a natural scientist by any stretch of the imagination. So my reflection on this, it basically comes from me working on social aspects of biodiversity conservation, so forest conservation and so on. So I could say, just point out basically that indeed this is a tendency, that there's the tendency that natural scientists just imagine that people are in the way and that people impede their access to the material that they need in order to conduct their research successfully. Where this is really manifested in my view, or at least in the areas with which I'm familiar, is around natural science approaches to the value of forests or the natural environment versus community interpretations of these things. So quite often, people, quite usually, I mean, this is a hell of a generalization, but building on the generalization of the way that this session is framed, usually Western researchers who are trying to source genetic material and so on in, let's say, forest-rich areas in the world or biodiversity-rich areas in the world, they often belittle or demean or overlook the familiarity of the people who live in these areas with the genetic material, and this is using the Western gaze actually, but anyway, with the genetic material itself. So, I mean, there's a tendency to overlook the familiarity of communities with the biodiversity with which you're familiar, and to dismiss the fact that quite often communities know in different ways through different forms of knowledge. They know what different trees or bushes or shrubs are good for in ways that foreign researchers don't know. So I think this, like, a recurring theme in everything that I'm probably going to talk about for the rest of this session is, like, I think there's a need to challenge this hierarchy of hierarchy of knowledge and of place and origin, because it comes with a risk of dismissing other types of knowledge that are also valuable.
Yeah.
Latif, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you, Bennett. I would say, give an example. Somalia is one of the countries that climate change is affecting the most, and one of the least prepared in the world. So one thing I would say was, a couple of years ago, we took a lot of sand samples from here, and colleagues of mine took it to the UK for it to be processed, and we were looking at how land degradation has happened, how it was 30 years ago, up to 30 years ago. I wouldn't, not as far as 50 years ago, as I said before. I know Roseanne said she can't remember that much. That probably shows my age. Not that I'm 50 yet. So we then invited all the Somalis who lived in those areas, who have experienced lush parts of the country where the sand was collected, which are now dry and the land is degraded. And we held workshops here in Somalia and in the UK. And it was really fascinating how people felt that the fact that we're doing this, it gave them us a respect that we wanted to learn from them, not just telling them what the science was telling us. It's the oral stories that Rosanna and my other colleagues were referring to. And you don't get much of that involves those who live there. And, sometimes you don't even need to travel far. I know in Edinburgh, in Scotland, you may not have large African populations, for example, but there are pockets. So you can actually find populations that you can interview who can, in fact, help your research, formulate your research before you come out to this part of the world. But the other thing I would say is, whatever we do, I think the phrase that we should do no harm should be what we should practice. And that is really, research should be about not doing harm to those communities.
Yes.
And I think that's, as long as we remember that, would be fine. Over to you.
I'm just going to ask one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to the Q&A. And actually, I'm going to leave it to the Q&A to discuss how we can begin making the turn, because I feel like that's more specific questions to various disciplines. But something that was brought up in a recent talk, actually last week, Ikal Angele gave a talk, and she's a huge Kenyan environmentalist, and she said the whole global North and global South dichotomy is completely unuseful, and not only that, it's actually detrimental to not just how the global South sees itself, but also communities within the global North that also get completely overlooked. And I guess, you know, Rosanna, we've spoken before about, you know, the Scottish government sees itself as being very liberal and human rights oriented. And then, you know, what happens is that I think students then are encouraged to go outwards because everything's fine at home. And I guess like looking to problematize like how that goes wrong, and kind of like that world, that very Western-centric, very white Western-centric worldview. I mean, could you all perhaps speak on that?
Well, the Scottish government may see itself as very liberal and human rights orientated, but human rights are actually not there in practice. And I just had a discussion yesterday with a member of the Human Rights Commission, because they're doing a review of governance, and I said it's too top down, it's too weak, it's sort of toadying to what the Scottish government want, and there are no human rights in practice. And I can assure you, I exhausted every single solicitor in Scotland, and I had a team of human rights experts over from Europe standing there saying there's multiple human rights breaches here, and not one would take the case forward. So you do not have access to legal representation. The regulatory bodies, and I have it in writing from them, will not get involved in individual cases, but people don't rush it to them all at the same time to report things. Then I got 9 people together and said, well, this isn't individual cases, this is 9 people. Nothing. 2 years later, I'm still sending emails asking for some response. No response. But the thing about it is that if the regulatory bodies won't regulate, and you can't get a solicitor then take a case forward, then your human rights might as well be written on toilet paper, I'm afraid, because you can have all the nice bits of paper. It's the same. The Equality Act's been in place for 10 years. It's not impacted my community. I don't see many human rights cases going through the Scottish courts. Do you? I mean, the research could be done there as to why, but I don't know if you'd ever really get to the bottom of it, because it seems to be some sort of top-down mechanism. We're giving you these rights on paper, but they're not there in reality. And the Human Rights Commission has admitted, you know, that the actual practice leaves a lot to be desired. So, you know, the implementation, it's all very well saying, oh, we're liberal, we've got these nice pieces of paper, we're going to get A stars from the UN for our human rights system. But when it falls down on the ground and it doesn't work, then basically you don't have a human rights system. And I think that this grandiose statements with the Scottish government need to be seriously taken with a pinch of salt. And that's my advice to all the students.
I get it. Well, does anyone else have anything to add on that?
I'm not sure I really understood the question, Bennett.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't exactly that clear, was it? I suppose the Global South is kind of encouraged as kind of the fieldwork zone still to academia, especially, you know, for political ecology, you know, which we're both in. That, you know, political ecologists, you know, the climate change is ravaging the Global South. Okay, well, then we have to go to the Global South as the message. And then what gets forgotten about, like within that process. And perhaps if, I'm not sure if you have any particular thoughts on that worldview from Western academia.
Not any especially strong or clear ones, but like taking a step back from the question specifically, I just reiterate what I said before, which is that I don't know, it's that there is this tendency based on the way that we inhabit the world and some of how we've been educated to see some parts of the world as more than and others as less than. And I think researchers coming from Western contexts would benefit from, or I shouldn't even say that they would benefit from, maybe they would benefit from, but also their research would benefit from accepting difference that is not necessarily a hierarchy. So in other words, it's okay. So just speaking from daily life experience, when I speak to people who've never studied anything in politics or social science, and they're European, they usually tend to see countries as categorized based on levels of infrastructure, where it's better to live based on, I don't know, better roads, less garbage in the street, and so on. And my experience, having spent a lot of time in both worlds, is usually that in some ways, being in European context is better, infrastructurally, for example, or often, certainly not always. And in other ways, such as like togetherness and support and other more economically unvalued aspects of life, non-European or non-Western parts of the world have an advantage on that. So just to say that I think it's helpful to look at the relationships between places if you do decide to go to the South to carry out research, as not necessarily one being better than and therefore coming to save or make visible the issues of the South, but to also just remain open to learning from the experiences of how people live in other places. Could be valuable, could be insightful.
If I can just add, and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Bennett, but the issue of human rights at home in Scotland, in other parts in the UK, the way it's applied there and the way it's applied where work is taking place or projects being implemented is not the same. Usually, it doesn't always, but usually sometimes it goes out the window. Also, the issue of accountability.
Yes.
That is really missing in terms of what's happening in the developing world. We've seen some of the cases of what happened with Oxfam, unfortunately, the whole sexual abuse, and that's just tip of the iceberg. The UN has serious issues, and not only here, and what I have observed in other parts of the world. So, and of course, research and what's being done and produced is very much intertwined with that environment where power lies with those who have money, who live in fortresses. They're not accountable to anyone. Unlike the charity commissions in the UK or international charities are not necessarily accountable to governments here. So it's a huge problem. Transparency is an issue. So yeah, I would say it's also, I think accountability is also a key. Another thing that would worth further discussion. And who's accountable to whom? And liability. If you produce lies about a country, you get away with it because there's no, you can't come after. No one's going to sue you in the UK from here because they don't have the means to do that. But you couldn't do that. You couldn't do that in the UK. I couldn't come to the UK and write about false things about the Ministry of Justice, for example, or an individual. I'll be sued. Here, Western academics or researchers can do that and get away with it. Over to you.
Providence, do you have anything to add here?
No.
Okay.
Not quickly. Thank you.
I think I'd like to then just begin with the Q&A. I'm seeing the questions coming in. Annabelle, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi. So we've talked a lot about kind of field work and what to problematize in field work. And I was thinking specifically if you have any thoughts about how to decolonize a desk-based piece of research, because especially in the context of COVID, with both domestic and international travel being more difficult, and if you're, I don't know, I'm working on a project right now which feels very for the UN, which feels very like Western centric, and it's bothering me. So if you have any thoughts on that, that would be much appreciated.
I think that's a really good question. Bennett, I sent you some bullet points earlier. I don't know if you received it. If you have, are you able to put it on the screen share? Because that may respond to what Annabelle is asking.
Just 1 second.
You're multitasking, which is not a
I know, I'm like reading questions, which are like really good questions, actually. So it's okay, here we go.
Should I just say something quickly while you search then?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
To Annabelle, I'd say if you're conducting desk-based research and you want to decolonize your approaches, decolonize the sources on which you draw. Try to be more diverse and representative of different perspectives in different parts of the world. That's it.
Great, thank you. So just to share with you, I agree with what you said, Ariane. This is an example of a project we did, in fact, during the height of the COVID a few months ago. We were looking at the impact of COVID on ordinary people, on sort of lives, livelihoods, and inclusion. So those three aspects, and the full research is available at our website. It's called COVID-19 and Sustainable Development in Somalia, Somaliland. So you can download it for free on our website. But just a few bullet points here. So the things we've done. So and this is all done remotely. So what has helped with us is that we have long relationship with the clients and the environment we're working with. Not necessarily we didn't know the client, but certainly we were embedded in the community. So that has helped. An understanding of the context you're operating, really important, which is also fast changing with COVID-19, as we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation. What you're going through in the UK with different tiers, it really is an uncertain world. And then the ability to use, I don't know who you will be talking to, Annabelle. Some people have smartphones in the developing world, but some people just have analog phones. So the ability to include everyone, and we will send them some credit so they can call us, because you need to give them access, and then just put it on the speakerphone so you can talk to them. In terms of photos, and you will see that report has got some photos. We asked people to show us what they wanted, whether they wanted to show us their faces or the environment they were in, and people have decided that they have chosen what they wanted to share. Also, language. I have no idea how many languages you speak, but in the case here, we gave people option of what language would be best for them to conduct the interview. So Somali, different dialects, Somali English, but also Arabic was what we spoke about. Illiteracy was a key issue, and making sure that someone who's illiterate, his view or her view is not less valuable than a high-ranking official. That was really crucial, and we make sure that we get a balance of that, but also make sure that we have a makeup of the population, especially the disadvantaged groups or the groups that are normally looked down for various reasons. We also talked about making sure that we constantly say, not only we ask them what we wanted to do, and we ask them what they thought about it and what changes we make when we were designing the project, but also whenever we finish one phase, we were saying, we want to move to the next phase. What do you think? Which direction do you think we should take? And lots of that. And one of the things we got them to do was to really have ownership, be proud of it, and a lot of them, we've asked them to disseminate it. And some of them have got 20,000 followers on Twitter, for example. Others less so, like me. I only have three people following me, and one of them is my mother. So they'd be no good of me distributing it. I don't want to take too much time, but there's a few things of what this was all desk-based research. So just have a look at that, and Bennett has it, so feel free to take it. These few bullet points, Annabelle, I hope it will be helpful. But also, I just add also, we make sure that there was a budget for people we were interviewing, because in a climate where people were on the edge, each time they talked to us, we were paying them $25. And that really lifted some of them, not from poverty, but at least has taken them through for a while. And we were engaging with at least 6 times during this study, so it was at least something for them too. So I'll stop there, but the full report is on our website if you have the time to read.
Yeah, well, actually, at the very end, before everyone leaves, if you would like to receive an email about the recording and any resources that are mentioned during the call, please leave your email at the end. Right, just finding out. Ananya, do you want to go next, please?
Ben, I've lost all. I can hear you, but I can't see anything. Don't know where I am.
Rosanna, we can see your name, but I think your camera is off.
I don't know. I don't know what I've done.
I
moved the phone and something's happened. So I'm into my emails and I don't want my emails. I want to see.
Because we can hear you, you can speak, yeah.
Yeah, it's nicer to see as well. I'm feeling missing out on something.
Well, we can see you again.
All right, start my video. Yeah, we are. That's better. Right.
So I just want to thank all our speakers. Firstly, this was a very enriching discussion, and just to listen to you guys talk was extremely valuable. My question's a bit specific to Ariana, but you spoke a bit about advantages and disadvantages of being a local and conducting research in an area where you come from. I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about your experience. And I asked this because while I'm still doing my undergraduate degree, I am from India, and I want to conduct research within India because that's the area of research I'm fascinated by, and knowing more about people back home and their stories. And I feel like I'm wondering whether people are more open to speaking with you, keeping in mind language, cultural understanding, sensitivity to local traditions, or is there a tendency of people and communities to still be more wary? Because as a researcher, there is still a power dynamic and still a relationship. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about your experiences, and anyone else who wants to chip in.
Sure. So first, let me start by telling you about the ethnic composition of the countries in which I work. So both Guyana and Suriname have significant populations of groups from African descent, Indian descent, as in East India, then smaller groups of Chinese, European, and indigenous groups, and I am forgetting somebody, forgive me. And Suriname also has a significant population of a community of people who descended from Java. So these are countries that are totally formed through the colonial enterprise, and hence different groups of people were brought there to work on plantations and so on over time. Anyway, so yes, it meant that I was easily categorized based on how I am perceived as fitting. Because I could start by saying that Suriname and Guyana also have a border controversy. So while they're friendly countries, there is tension between the two of them. It doesn't usually escalate to violence, but there's still diplomatic tension. And that meant that being in Suriname, I was people were open, especially in the capital city. They were open and friendly and received me, I don't know, as someone who was almost local, pretty local, except for the fact that I couldn't speak the local language. Well, there are several languages, but there's one, Shran and Tongo, that everybody can speak more or less, and I couldn't speak it. So they knew that I was somewhat foreign. And that was fine in the capital city because most people spoke English, but then in the forested areas, it was weird because so the communities in the forest are usually indigenous or maroon. The indigenous look like, I guess, American Indians, you could say, but the maroons look very African. And then I kind of was like getting a raised eyebrow when people didn't know how to receive me because I kind of looked like I belonged to the African group, but didn't because of also how I dressed and so on. So navigating that and language in the like the forested areas was a little strange. People were still like open and receptive, but they were still like aware of my difference. And I can't quite say how this impacted my work or my results or conclusions because I can't be another person to like have a different experience, but I definitely felt it. And then in the case of Guyana, again, in the cities, it was more or less fine because they were used to researchers coming from all over the place to do different things. So it was just like, okay, you're here, no big deal. But then in the forested areas, the indigenous people are especially wary of the African groups. Mm-hmm. So then me being in the forested areas, like, I also felt like a little bit of resistance from indigenous communities. So that was also strange. And then on top of all of it, I was from an American university in Hungary. So I was not associated with the University of Guyana or the University of the West Indies. So not from a regional institution at the time, which meant that despite being from one of the countries I was working in, I had to get permission to study the communities and go through all kinds of administrative hurdles. So it's strange. I mean, reflecting on all of it, I could say that it definitely, like my ability to speak different languages or inability, actually, what I look like, how people perceive me politically, and so on. It definitely limited some of the data that I had access to and the people I had access to. But it also opened lots of doors because people were I knew how to navigate the space culturally. And I think that really helps.
Thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, go for it, Vijay.
Just very briefly, Ananya, I think I haven't worked in India, but I have worked in Pakistan, and I think I'm not saying it's the same. It's obviously two countries are neighboring, and issues you encounter, as Ariana was saying, that when you are interviewing or researching your own community, there is, if you have access and that understanding, and of course you can relate to, great, but you have to be aware of your own prejudice and perceptions the same way that you would do even with any community you're working with, but even more so when you work in your own community, and also understand how they see you. As a young woman, as being from a certain caste, and we have done work in India, but we worked with locals and universities, and we were listening to them how they conduct the research, and that was making sure that you have a diverse group of people, so everyone feels in, and if someone feels uncomfortable in a certain area, we'll send somebody else. So you really have to, I'd say, being aware about your own prejudice and perceptions and understanding and preconception is really helpful before you even think about your own your respondents. And let's be honest, we all have our own prejudice and preconceived ideas about other races, cultures, clans, castes, and the list is long, unfortunately. Over to you, Bennett.
I just wanted to see if Providence or Rosanna had comments on that, as I feel like it's a pretty broad question that everyone can answer.
The only thing I would say, again, Bennett, sorry, I would reiterate that I think that's the beauty of co-production. Like if you're looking at it from a more objective outward slant, and the person inside is working inside a community, is working with you and can't see it because they're too close, any prejudices, that's the beauty of co-production, because the other person can say, wait a minute, whoa, hold on, this is wrong, or this isn't working for this reason. And that two minds working together, one sort of keeping in check the other one, you know, the one from within the community perspective can guide the external one where they go wrong, and the external can say to them, you know, this is wrong. I think that I really think you must work it like that to get any value out of it, in the current climate anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true that as you are of the same nationality, you speak the same language is an advantage. I also experienced this in all of my research in Rwanda because one, you can speak the language they understand. Second, the local authority can well introduce you and comes with you and then says, this is the person, you should answer the questions. And then the research goes smoothly in that way. Yeah, so I think the rest has been already said.
Just going down the line, Alexa Wagner.
Hi there. So I was just curious about your approaches in preserving and shifting social and cultural norms when you're working with and researching communities, and also how you approach like power dynamics and quid pro quo relationships that could potentially feel exploitative.
Any chance you can slow down and say that again, please?
Yeah, I didn't quite catch the tail end.
Yeah, so I was just
the
curious.
The question is in the chat, actually.
Oh yeah, I did post it in the chat, but I can re-say that. So I was just curious about how you approach when you're researching and working with communities. How do you address social norms and how you can shift them or preserve social norms, and also how you would approach power dynamics and quid pro quo relationships that could potentially feel exploitative to the communities you're working with.
Could you say a little bit more about how quid pro quo relationships could feel like?
So I was recently looking at some research that was saying within refugee camps, you have to be really careful with asking people to participate because they might perceive that participation, oh my goodness, participation could lead to some sort of benefits, and that they may not necessarily understand that. Well, I guess because of their layered vulnerabilities, they believe, oh, if I participate in this research, I might get a faster resettlement process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. My intuitive response to that is to have I can't remember what it's called at the moment, but the sheet where, you know, if you're going to talk to people and engage with them, you set out who you are, what you're doing with the data, what they get or do not get from participating in the research, how you're going to treat their information, whether their names will be, whether you'll use pseudonyms, whether you'll quote them, whether you'll use their pictures publicly and all of that. There's usually, at least in ethical review processes that I had to go through before doing research. It was necessary to outline all these things before speaking with groups, because yeah, it's really important to make sure that people know what they're getting out of or not getting out of a particular engagement. And power dynamics, again, I think that thanks. Yes, ethics forum. So power dynamics, it's really difficult to avoid that, because just by embodying different positions in the world and taking that with us as we engage with other people, there are like power relations. But I feel like I'm saying too much and there are other people on the panel. So I'm just going to quickly say being aware of them is a good first step. And critically engaging with the way you view the world in awareness of your own power, your own power position, let's say. That's a pretty good start.
Yes, so I think you are saying the truth, because also understanding the customs, the community customs, I mean, maybe their culture before you're going there. So for example, I'm not Kenyan, but I know in Kenya, the Maasai population, when you are going there, you probably need to dress like their own dressing code, So in that case, they might really understand that you respect them, then can hear you and answer your questions. Second, when I conducted the interviews before, I have to explain the context of the research and how beneficial is that to the communities. And then third, ideally, we have to give some compensation, like for something like, I usually tell them I will buy the beer for them, and then I try to make it like friendly, smile to them, and then yeah, I give some little compensation for their participation. Yeah, that's what I could say on this.
Alexa, I think what you're referring to is mostly social behavior and unwritten rules of how things are done in certain societies. One of my favorite books is it's called Watching the English by Kate Fox. I don't know if you've read it. It's a fascinating book about the English society and the fact that how UK, especially in England, people behave. So when somebody say to you, that's interesting, it doesn't necessarily mean interesting. It's actually meaning what you're talking about. It's not interesting at all. Or when you're saying too many thank you and please when you don't really mean it. So really one has to understand the society and the population that one is going to operate, as Province was saying. And what makes it difficult is that most of these things are unwritten rules. So you can't necessarily just read and go to a website. You can have a general idea, but so clearly relying on people who have an understanding of, if you say you're interested in Kenya, talking to someone like Province and to give you that insider knowledge, really crucial. In terms of power dynamics, yes, there are power dynamics, and especially if you want female participation in research, which is really crucial, and you sending a male to talk to a female in certain cultures, that's a big no-no. So obviously sending a female to talk to a female and making sure you give them the opportunity to speak openly, whether that is running a focus group just for women or giving a female the platform to talk to you freely, really important. Also being aware what would cause friction and put people in trouble if they were to be seen. For example, certain level of expectation from a white person conducting an interview itself has an issue, whether that is expectation of resources, as you were saying earlier, or whether it relates to bad experience or good experience they have had with similar research. One thing we keep hearing a lot is that researchers come, you promise the world, and you don't deliver anything. And those ethics and morals are really missing a lot from a lot of researchers. All right, I think Rosanna, would you like to add something?
I would just say I agree with everything you've said, Latif. I think you've nailed it, to use a term from Strictly Come Dancing. But really, I think at the very beginning, not just laying out, what their expectations could be, and how very importantly how the information is going to be stored, who's going to have access to it, if it's going to be autonomized, etc. I think that's something that has to be done. And handing out a sheet to a community that maybe can't read that well, they'll just bin it. And then later on it will cause problems. So it needs a personal touch. But I think also making clear to them what the intrinsic value is in doing this piece of research. I mean, just doing it for, to get a PhD or something. Why they're doing it, and what's intrinsic value to the community in doing it? How can it possibly be followed with follow-up? For instance, if this piece of research might potentially help the community, in what way, and how can that be developed upon? Is it who they put it to? Is it how they launch it? Is it how it gets publicity? I don't know, but certainly all these issues need to be teased out before you go in and say, right, here's a questionnaire, give me your answers.
Alexa, have you read that book? The Watching the English?
I haven't. I just wrote it down though. I'm gonna put it on my list.
I don't know if you're English or Scottish, but it would be good to understand things that you take for granted, but others may not see, may see as odd. or as difficult. So it's sometimes I always reflect on myself before I talk to someone and say, what's my perceptions about this community? You know, my attitude to gender, disability, you know, economic well-being, so on and so forth. All right, I'm waffling. I'll stop.
Well, thank you all so much.
So I'm very conscious of time right now. We have 2 questions left. I'm going to cap it at that. If our speakers would graciously be willing to answer them, and I'm always aware that, especially, you know, with my students, it's like 45 minutes. Someone told me this once, that 45 minutes is a good time to concentrate before you need a break. And so I'm aware, like, it's kind of a mental marathon to continuously go on loop. So anyway, we are going to wrap up soon. So Jack, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps if you could keep it to 1 question, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Bennett. We've talked a lot about the things that researchers do poorly when they come into communities from the outside and impose their sort of Western ideals on research. But has anyone had experience of what Western institutions do poorly when researchers, perhaps from what we've been calling the global South, or these communities that are stakeholders, how are they treated when they come to the Western institution and surrounded by Western academics? Like, how can they be better supported?
I mean, there are some really good examples of people coming into Western institutions that are treated well, treated with respect and valued. I certainly have had that experience myself, but there are also examples where unfortunately you use as a token because they have to tick the boxes because that's what the funder require, or it looks cool. It's one of those analogy of saying, I'm not racist because I have black friends. So unfortunately, I have seen both of those, and I don't know what other experience others have had, but I have seen both examples.
I'm just going to agree with what Latif just said. I'm still learning about how these dynamics work. So yeah, there's not very much I can add at the moment. But good question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm muted, sorry. Anything from you, Providence or Rosanna?
Well, it's not really something that I've had the experience of, Bennett. So I couldn't really comment on it.
Sure. Anything from you, Providence?
I was saying I don't have much experience on that.
Okay. We're going to wrap up with our final question from Aideen.
I'm muted. Here we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you to all the speakers for this conversation. It's been truly insightful. To keep my question brief, I'm coming from a natural science perspective, and at the beginnings of designing a research project that is very much focusing on really integrating the community's involvement in the research, making sure that it is co-produced and co-designed from the get-go. But I'm facing difficulties in that applying for funding and working through a university system, they very much require you to have very specific research questions and hypotheses set out from the get-go, which doesn't really allow for true co-production with the communities that are involved, because one has to happen before the other. And I was just curious if any of you have had experience of this or would have advice on how to navigate this in a way to make sure that the communities are involved from the beginning, but yet, just this, I guess, conflict of timeline almost, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's a very good question. So I've used questionnaires with my socioeconomic research. And then I composed questions actually before the research itself. And these questions were shared to the local relevant government institution who actually approved the questions on behalf of the communities. And then, yeah, it was the other way around. So we did not, ideally, we did not ask the communities to approve the questions, but rather the direct involved government institution. That's how it went. And I think it was good so far.
Mm-hmm.
I had a similar thing. I was co-opted to work with a university researcher a few years back, and from the beginning we sat down, I introduced her to different community members, and we set the questions and the parameters together from the outset. But it was funded, and they didn't expect her to co-opt me. They thought I was just a volunteer. And when the research came out, it didn't come out quite the way they wanted, so it was never published.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. Eden, I think you really have I can see the dilemma that I guess a lot of people in your position would have. And my advice would be, I think one of the reasons that Bennett has organized this today was not just to hear me waffling, my colleagues were speaking more sensible things than me, I guess, but it's also the network you have here. You know, colleagues who have really a good track record, and it's that network that is really valuable. We'd certainly be happy to help if you think we can help you with what the realities are on the ground here. And indeed, Province, who is a natural scientist, would be a natural ally for you, I hope. Secondly, I would say within your institution, there are clearly staff members who have expertise or specialists in a certain part of the world. And approaching those, I found certainly when I was a younger student many years ago, has helped me to at least clarify what I had in mind. So look closer to home also, but also to your students, to student makeup who may have come from that part of the world. And believe me, just having a contact like Province and you saying in the application form you're going to be working with her or some form of collaboration, that's the sort of thing that they would like. So you're not just sitting in a bubble in, is it in Edinburgh or St. Andrews? No, St. Andrews, sorry, not Edinburgh. Yeah, that you are. So I would say that those sort of things would help. Certainly it has helped me in the past.
Thank you.
Just speaking from my research experience, which again is not at all natural science, I'd say that usually when with research funding applications or prospectuses or whatever is the deliverable that you have to complete before being allowed to go into the field, usually these deliverables are used as evidence by those higher up to demonstrate that you know what you're doing, and not necessarily to trap you or keep you locked into the questions that you select or the hypotheses that you put forward. Usually it's a measure of competence, because most people who do research and have had to stare at a blank screen and write up findings and draw useful conclusions from what they've done are fully aware of the fact that research changes as you go through the different processes. So there is always that space, even if people don't say it because they don't want you to feel like you can just go off and do anything. There's often usually a space for your work becoming what is unplanned. And maybe that's the dirty little secret of academic research.
Mm-hmm. Music to my ears, thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up there. I guess just final remarks. Because I feel like there's not really spaces within St. Andrews and our university here, let alone in many universities, to kind of discuss what's wrong with inherently what we're being trained to do. I think that's why it's so important that we come together as students to create these spaces, and hopefully we can make this a series possibly, or something that continues on. And I just want to say there's no waffling happening here, Latif. I think everything that has been said so far has been incredibly useful, and I hope everyone kind of walks away slightly uncomfortable, and because I think that's where the actual work begins, because with the event titled Navigating Allyship, no one's going to navigate that allyship for you. It's incumbent on you to navigate that yourself, in the attempt to kind of turn research to be more accountable and transparent and collaborative. Yeah, there's work ahead for all of us, especially students that are trying to make a difference in this way. So I guess that being said, we will send out this details on the recording to everyone that's actually registered. I realize I don't need your emails because that's why I set up the registration system. And yeah, a few resources were mentioned today that we'll send out. And yeah, I think that's about it. I wish we could clap for you, but because everyone's kind of videoless and muted, I just want to say thank you to our speakers, and thank you so much for donating this time to us, while spending time with us. It's been fantastic. So.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So yeah, we're getting clapping emojis left and right. So there we go. What a time to live. All right. Well, I hope everyone has a good evening, and yeah, please like our social media pages, Third Generation Project, Anthropology Society, Sustainable Development Society, and the BAME Students Network. We hope to collaborate with ourselves again. So yeah, have a good evening. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.